But now, we left off on the last tape in Matthew 27:50 to 54. We were speaking of Christ. He cried out with a great voice. He yielded up the ghost. And I believe that we can prove conclusively that he was crying out to the great fleet of ships that were to come forth. Now, Matthew 27:51, there's an interesting thing, and we're going to cover it in detail. This one insignificant little word, or so it would appear. I think as a lot of people read Scripture and they pass over it, and we're going to prove it to you here in just a little bit. I think it's going to knock your socks off. This one word can answer such a multitude of questions. Where it says, and the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. Now, we find that this was the beginning of extraterrestrial help that was coming from heaven, from outer space. And why? What was their purpose? And it says the earth did quake and the rocks rent. And they did not say earthquake, but that the earth did quake. Why? My friends, it was because something came once again, as in the days of Joshua, as in the days of Exodus, and we find the very same thing happening again here at the crucifixion of Christ. The only thing, if we look at it logically and scientifically, and we put aside our prejudiced, superstitious, previous views, which I myself have had also. It's all I had to go with until I started looking into it and examining these things. Something caused this darkness. The only thing that could cause it would be something approximately the size of our own planet. As we said many times, that Venus was called a sister planet, and we've pointed out how all of the ancients spoke of its ability to leave its orbit around the sun like us, because of all of the so-called planets in our solar system. It's the only one that makes a perfect circle. It does not wobble like our planet or any of the others. So I say that this great, strange, what I call a space station, the house of the Almighty, it came in close proximity, and it was what created this shaking and this rolling to and fro, and I think we can prove this in just a little bit. But now, to tie all this together, let's go back and let me remind you once again an example of when the earth did quake. We go back to Exodus 19:18 of the King James. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended up on it in fire. Let me stop right there in the middle of it. Now, here is what has been so confusing, even to myself, and to, I'm sure it's confusing to a lot of other people, because, you see, they think of this, the Almighty descending and standing upon a mountain. Well, my friends, those that would be old enough to remember, they talk about people, I sailed upon the Queen Mary. A lot of times you could be up on the main deck. You could be up in the pilot's control room where they steer the ship from and they watch what's ahead, or you could be in one of the lower decks. It does not always mean that you're on the outside of a vehicle. You say we got on board a plane and we went on this plane to California, but naturally we all rode on the inside of it. We could use examples. I went by wagon train. I went on a wagon. Now, it could have been a covered wagon, a car, all different types of vehicles. So I think that this word, even those of us that are acquainted with the English language, we get very confused by this word. Now let me read Exodus 19:18, that's context, and keep that in mind. And Mount Sinai, and we're going to prove Scripture by Scripture here, not what I think. And please don't accuse me of taking something out of context, because we'll have Scripture prove this. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof descended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. Now, you see, let's talk about mount quaked, and I think we've looked these words up in all kinds of other tapes that we've presented to you that mean to oscillate, to turn, as vibration, as something great and mighty settling down close to this earth. Now Matthew 27:52. These great ships coming in and this mount, and we're going to see those that come out of it. We've proved it before. Now here's a real strange, awesome statement, I think even to the religious who never considered the scientific part of it. This is mind-boggling. Matthew 27:52, and the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints. Now the word saints, the word santos, believing offspring. And many of the bodies of the saints which slept arose. Slept meant death, died. All saints slept from Adam to the Christ, with the exception, as we note in 2nd Ezra 6:26. I know the church world has long ignored the apocryphal books, and some of them are included in 2 great large volumes called the Pseudo-Pediographa, which means a superfluous, erroneous, fictitious, many different descriptions. And so we find that the churchmen of the Dark Ages, not all, mind you, but even some today, because they don't want to have to try to explain it to their congregation, so they say they're erroneous, they're superfluous, and they were not sanctioned by the church fathers. Now, not all church fathers, but many of those of old time. Now, we're not talking about the men of the Reformation, because we find that Knox and Calvin and many of those that took part in putting together the Geneva Bible, they included the Apocrypha with cross-references referring to both the Old and New Testament. And you cannot refute that there's a great correlation there. And when you look up these things that were studied out by great men of God, you can believe in them. But I'll let you take that for what it's worth. 2nd Ezra 6:26. And they shall see the men that have been taken up, those who have not tasted death from their birth. So it appears they spoke of other men besides Enoch and Elijah, who went to outer space. They apparently never returned, and they did not see death. Now Matthew 27:53, and came out of the graves after his resurrection. Now get this. This is what's going to stagger a lot of people. A lot of folks are going to stumble over this. But I think if they'll bear with us, they'll be able to understand it. Now you remember, as I said before, the Greeks, even in this ancient Greek, they were unfamiliar with this Hebrew, the true ancient old Hebrew that had disappeared 400 years BC. And so you remember the Hebrew language was written from the right to the left, and the Greeks wrote from the left to the right. And if you were to look at the old ancient Greek language in which all this was written in, they did not use periods, they didn't use commas, they didn't space in between their letters. It was all run together. It would give you mental indigestion. We have no idea what great lengthy work our progenitors went to present this evidence to us. But Matthew 27:53, they came out of the graves after his resurrection, and they went into the holy city and appeared unto many. But my friends, I think we will prove here, and I think you'll go along with me, and it will make sense if we realize, and they appeared unto many, and they went unto the holy city. Now, with all the scalawags that were in Jerusalem at that time, it had been defamed and defiled, and I don't think that you could call that place holy. I don't believe that God was there, or else they wouldn't have been murdering all of the innocent children of Israel, 2,000 babes, and they wouldn't have crucified Christ. How could you call that a holy city? But I think that there is one holy city, but it is in outer space, as we have proved many times. Now bear with me, go along and hear me out. Now, I don't believe that holy city was Jerusalem on this earth, geographically located in Israel, this walled city that was filled with mixed rabble. that were in there among the true Israelites. Now we're going to discuss this in greater length later on, but the holy city that is spoken of here, this is what made the earth to quake and shakes, so to speak. Now verse 54, but when the centurion and they that were with him watched Jesus, saw the earth quake, and these things, notice my friends, plural. Now you have to remember, we got to keep this in mind. I am sure that this centurion soldier, who was merely a servant of Rome, and they had no respect for the Israelites whatsoever, and they were there to wipe them out, or these people in Jerusalem, and they were calling themselves Jews. These Roman soldiers had no respect for them. They didn't care about them one way or the other, and it didn't bother them any more than shooting a sick dog. But notice, my friends, something shook his cage. Not because Christ was on the cross and he talked very sweetly to this man, who he told would be with him in paradise. He promised this man, he said, this day I'm making you a promise. You will be with me in paradise. And I think we've proved in other chapters that paradise means the garden, one of the planets in space. You will be with me in the house of God. Now hang on, and we're going to show where he ascends to it, and he sits down as the Almighty. Now, you think I'm all wet? Just hang on, bear with me. Now, let me repeat it one more time. I want you to get this wonderful point. Now, when the centurion and they that were with him, watching Jesus, saw the earthquake and these things, plural, that were done. Now, this is talking about what was done at the first resurrection. And it says, and they feared greatly, saying, truly, this was the Son of God. Now, the concordant literal New Testament translation, they have the Roman soldiers saying, truly, this was one of the sons of the gods. Now, Exodus 19:18, and it speaks also, and the earth did quake also. Now, I ask a lot of these preachers, where it's talking about the dead that walk the streets, and they claim that they raised from all the prophets from the righteous Abel to Zechariah. And I said, where did all these dead saints go? Did they go back to the local chariot factory and try to get their job back? Or where did they go? Because it talked about all of those that were seen, that walked the streets and were seen by many, and they went into the holy city. Now, Jude 1:14, and it goes on to say, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Yahweh, or God, if you like, cometh with 10,000s of his saints. Now, remember, Adam was a pilgrim who was dropped off on this planet. Doesn't it seem reasonable that the Almighty would drop into for a visit, shall we say, to see how his grandkids were doing and to see if they were fulfilling what he told them to do? And apparently he checked them out several times throughout history, and they constantly ignored his commandments. Genesis 1:26-28, it says, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish. You cannot be fruitful or multiply or replenish unless there was something there before. I think we've pointed out in